The emergency pod had been drifting for 9 days when the Ithari scout ship picked up its signal. The signal was weak, old format, and barely readable. Most crews would have logged it as noise and moved on. Goss wanted to. He pulled up the fuel cost on his screen, showed it to Commander Sarev, and said 3 words, "Not worth it." Sarev looked at the numbers. Then he looked at Neera, the medic, who had not said anything yet but was already standing near the door with her kit in her hand, as if the decision had already been made. It had not been made, but Sarev ordered the course correction anyway. They found the pod wedged inside the debris of a colony ship that had been torn apart by a microdebris storm. 42 crew members, 1 survivor. The pod had 3 hours of oxygen left when they cracked it open. The human inside was unconscious, frost burned across one side of his face, and gripping the manual release lever so hard his fingers had to be pried off one by one. Even in stasis, he had been holding on. Neera got him breathing. It took 22 minutes and 2 emergency injections of a compound she had never used on a human before. She read the dosage from a medical archive that was 11 years out of date and adjusted on instinct. He survived. When he woke up, he did not ask where he was. He did not panic. He looked at the ceiling, then at Neera's four-armed silhouette, then at the unfamiliar walls and said, "How many others?" Neera told him. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were dry. He said, "Thank you for coming." Then he asked if there was anything he could do to help. His name was Ral Davin. He was a cargo engineer, 34 years old, from a colony world most Ithari had never heard of. He had no weapons, no diplomatic credentials, no special training. What he had was a habit of making himself useful wherever he landed. He started small. He noticed a coolant line in the medical bay that was vibrating at the wrong frequency, and fixed it with a piece of wire and a tool he borrowed from Neera without asking. She did not mind. She watched him work with the focused, economical movements of someone who had fixed things alone in dark places many times before. Goss noticed the fix 3 days later. He did not say anything, but he stopped referring to Ral as the cargo in his status reports. Sarev gave Ral a task to justify his presence on the ship. Debris cataloging, boring, precise, requiring no language skills beyond numbers. Ral did it without complaint. He did it faster than their automated systems and caught 2 classification errors in the first week. The crew had never carried a human before. They did not know what to make of him. He ate whatever they gave him, slept in a repurposed supply closet he had organized himself, and never asked for anything that was not strictly necessary. When Goss accidentally sealed Ral out of a corridor during a routine pressure drill, Ral waited in the cold section for 40 minutes without using the emergency comm. When Goss found him, Ral said, "I figured you would notice eventually." Goss stared at him for a long moment. Then he recalibrated the drill protocols so it would not happen again. He did not apologize. Ral did not expect him to. Neera spent her off hours teaching Ral basic Ithori words. He learned fast, faster than she expected. He explained it simply. Humans had spent centuries learning each other's languages before they ever reached space. The skill was built in by now. It was how they survived among strangers. Neera wrote that down in her personal log. She wrote down a lot of things Ral said, not because they were dramatic or wise, but because they were small and precise and revealed something she did not have a word for yet. She would find the word later. It was the same word in every language she checked. Stubborn. On the 14th day, Sarev called Ral to the bridge for the first time. He showed him a star map and told him where they were going. Ether Prime. 11 weeks out. Their homeworld and the only place that made sense to take a human with nowhere else to go. Ral looked at the map for a long time. He asked one question, "What's the situation there?" Sarev was quiet for a moment too long. He said, "Peaceful for now." He did not explain what he meant. Ral did not push. But he stood at that star map for a while after Saurav left, tracing the space between the marked systems with his finger, reading the gaps the way engineers read schematics, looking for the thing that was missing. He found it 3 days later, when he overheard Goss and Nira talking in low voices about something called the drun. He did not interrupt. He kept cataloging debris. But that night, in the supply closet that was his room, he lay awake doing the kind of math that had nothing to do with numbers. He thought about the 42 people on his ship who were gone. He thought about Saurav saying peaceful for now. He thought about what it meant that a species with no army had given a stranger oxygen, warmth, and 11 weeks of their time. He owed them something. He was not sure yet what it was going to cost him to pay it, but he had never once in his life let a debt go unpaid, and he was not going to start in someone else's solar system. He closed his eyes. He started planning. Nobody told Ral about the drun directly. He had to collect the story the way you collect splinters, one small painful piece at a time, from people who did not realize they were giving it. Goss let something slip during a navigation briefing. A route marked as not recommended cut through a system that should have been a routine waypoint. When Ral asked why they were going around it, Goss said drun territory, the way someone says a word repeated so many times it has stopped sounding like a threat and started sounding like weather. Nira said more. She told Ral the drun were a hive-mind species that did not negotiate, did not hesitate, and did not stop once they had decided a world was worth taking. The Ithori Council had spent a year trying to form a defense coalition with neighboring systems. The coalition had collapsed 4 months ago. 2 species involved had quietly begun relocating their populations to less visible planets. Ral listened and asked, "What does the Ithori military look like?" Nira was quiet for a moment. "We have a defense force, about 400 volunteers, mostly trained for internal security, riot response." Ral nodded, "And the drun fleet." She told him the number. He did not react. He looked out the viewport at the dark between stars and said, "Okay." Like she had told him, the cargo weight was heavier than expected, and he was already thinking about how to redistribute the load. He started asking different questions after that, not about the drun's weapons but about the Ithori's infrastructure, orbital platforms, power source on the planetary shield. How old was it? Had it ever been run at full capacity? Goss overheard one of these conversations and told Ral flatly that humans were strange. Ral agreed. Goss seemed satisfied and went back to his console. The weeks passed. The pale reach moved through empty space at a steady pace, and inside it something was slowly shifting. Ral rewired the ship's secondary sensor array one afternoon because he had noticed a lag adding 3 seconds to threat detection. He did not ask permission. He fixed it, logged what he had done, and left the log on Saurav's console. Saurav said nothing. But the next morning, Ral found a better chair in his supply closet room. The old one had been leaving marks on his back. No one claimed responsibility for the chair. Nira brought Ral into medical consultations to see if human and Ithori biology overlapped in useful ways. It did, in places that surprised her. Ral showed her a pressure technique for slowing blood loss that worked on 3 of the 4 Ithori circulatory systems. She showed him how Ithori bodies responded to low oxygen in a way that let them survive vacuum exposure for up to 90 seconds with preparation. He made her teach him the preparation. She did, then asked why. "In case I need to go outside the ship fast," he said. She started to argue there would be no reason for that. He looked at her. She stopped arguing. By week 7, Ral had eaten dinner with the full crew 16 times. The first 3 had been awkward. By the 8th, Goss was voluntarily telling him things about Ithori navigation culture that had no practical value, which was the Goss version of friendship. On the 39th night, Ral sent a transmission. He used an old human emergency frequency that bounced through relay stations without a registered sender. He was in the communications room for 11 minutes. When he came out, his hands were doing the thing they did when he was thinking hard, tapping a quiet rhythm against his leg, 4 beats. Pause, 3 beats, pause, repeat. Sorev found him. Who did you contact? People, Ral said. What people? The kind who come when you ask. Sorev wanted more. He asked twice. Ral gave the same answer both times, not to be difficult, but because it was the truest answer he had. He had sent the message into a network of humans across colony worlds and frontier stations. Engineers, veterans, medics, builders of people who had all, at some point, helped hold something together that should have fallen apart. He had not told them what to bring. He had told them what the Ithari were facing, where the planet was, and asked them to come if they could. He did not know who would answer. He never did when he sent messages like this. But humans had a habit. When someone said help, they tended to show up. Sorev studied him. You cannot promise this will work. No, Ral agreed. You cannot promise anyone will come. No. Sorev's 4 eyes held him steady. Then why did you do it? Ral thought about 42 people who had not made it out of the debris field. He thought about a crew that had burned fuel to pull one pod out of the dark. Because you stopped, he said. When you didn't have to, that means something. And I want the people I trust to know where something like that is worth defending. Sorev had no answer for that. He went back to the bridge and did not rescind the transmission. Ether Prime was 3 weeks away. Ral went back to his closet, sat in his better chair and kept planning. Ether Prime looked, from orbit, like something painted by someone who had been given too much blue and green and forgot to explain about deserts. The forests bioluminesced at night in slow, rolling waves of cold light. The cities sat at the edges of tidal zones, half on land, half on water, built by a people who had decided the border between two things was the best place to live. Ral looked at it through the viewport and felt something he did not have a name for. Not homesickness, something adjacent. The specific ache of seeing a thing worth protecting that does not yet know how to protect itself. They landed in the capital, Selvarath, in late afternoon. The air smelled like rain and something sweet that Nira told him was pollen from a tree that only bloomed when the tidal current shifted. Ral breathed it in. Then he picked up his bag and got to work. Ren was already there. She was standing outside the landing bay with a data pad in one hand and a cold drink she had not touched. She was short, dark-haired, and had the stillness of someone who had spent years in rooms where the wrong word ended negotiations. She had been a diplomat once, then a crisis consultant, then whatever you called a person who showed up to broken situations and made them slightly less broken through sheer refusal to leave. She and Ral had worked together once 4 years ago on a colony world where a mining dispute had come within a week of civil war. They were not friends. They trusted each other, which was more useful. Bad, Ral asked. Define bad, Ren said. She handed him the data pad. The council met with Ral the next morning. High Arbiter Tesov, the oldest and calmest person Ral had seen in a position of authority, looked at him across a long stone table and asked what one human engineer could possibly offer a world facing a conquering fleet. Ral looked around the room at the 12 council members, at Ren near the door, at Bale, the young Ithori liaison assigned to shadow him who was trying not to look nervous. Then he said, I'm not here to fight your war. I already sent for people better at different parts of this than I am. I'm here to make sure the parts connect. Tesov asked what he meant. You have an orbital shield system, 3 platforms, 400 volunteers, and a planet full of people who are good at building things. What you don't have is a plan that uses all of those at the same time in the right order. That's an engineering problem. I fix those. The council was not convinced, but they were listening. That was enough. Bale showed Ral around the city that afternoon. He was young, earnest, and had the habit of explaining things that needed no explanation and going silent when explanation would have been useful. Ral liked him immediately. They went to the planetary shield generator first. It was large, old, and had not been run at full power in 30 years. The technician on duty said the power coupling was degraded and would need 6 months to replace properly. Ral asked if he could look at it. The technician, who had expected argument, said yes out of surprise. Ral looked at it for 4 minutes. Then he asked for a schematic, a calibration tool, and something strong to drink. He sat on the floor next to the coupling and started reading. Bale watched him. "Do you know what you are looking at?" "Not yet," Ral said, "but I will." 3 days later, the first human ship arrived. A small freighter with 6 people aboard. 2 structural engineers from a Martian colony, a field medic, a woman who had spent 15 years building communication arrays in hostile environments, and 2 people whose specific skills Ral had not asked about and who had simply decided to come. Then 4 more arrived, then 9. None of them were soldiers. They were people who had built things in bad conditions, fixed things that should not have been fixable, and kept communities alive through floods and fires and pressure failures, and the 1,000 quiet disasters that happen on the frontier where nobody is watching. The Ithori watched them arrive with an expression Ral had started to recognize. Not fear, not hope, something between the two. On the 7th night, Ral was on the roof of his building, looking at the forest rolling slow, light into the dark when Tessav found him. The old arbiter stood beside him for a while without speaking. Then, "You called them just like that, and they came." "Some of them," Ral said. "Why?" Ral thought about it honestly. "Because we have lost enough worlds of our own, we know what it looks like before it happens." He paused, and because someone asked. Tessav was quiet for a long time. "I have governed this world for 31 years, he said. "I have never once asked another species for help." "I know," Ral said. "That is why I asked for you." Tessav looked at him. He did not respond. He did not need to. He stood there in the dark beside a human engineer on the roof of a tidal city, and below them the forest kept breathing its cold, slow light into the night, wave after wave, the way things that intend to survive always do. The humans did not arrive with a plan. They arrived with questions. That was the first thing the Ithori noticed and could not explain. Every other species they had dealt with came to a crisis with either answers or demands. The humans came asking about load tolerances, atmospheric pressure at altitude, power grid layouts, and the tensile strength of the cables holding the orbital platforms in position. Doru, the structural engineer from the Martian colony, spent his first 2 days doing nothing except walking around and touching walls. He would press his palm flat against a surface, close his eyes, and stand very still. Bale followed him through 3 city districts before he finally asked what he was doing. "Feeling the planet," Doru said. Bale did not know what that meant. Doru explained that low-gravity worlds had a different vibration signature in their structures, and that if you knew how the ground moved you knew how to build on it without it shaking apart under orbital bombardment. Bale understood the words. The idea of knowing a planet by touch was something he filed away and thought about for the rest of the week. Lane arrived on the 9th day and changed everything. She was a xenobiologist who had spent 12 years studying how hive-mind species made decisions. She had no military training, had never seen a battle, and had an attention that found patterns in places others had stopped looking. She sat in the council archive for 3 days without much sleep. On the 4th day, she walked into the room where Ral and Ren were working and put a data sheet on the table. "They always use 3 waves," she said. "Everyone knows that," Ral said. "Everyone knows they use 3 waves. Nobody ever asked why." She sat down. "Hive minds don't make tactical decisions the way commanders do. They run on successful patterns. The 3-wave approach worked the first time 31 years ago, so they have used it every time since. Same spacing, same interval, same target priority order." Ren leaned forward. "How consistent?" Entirely. Across 19 worlds. The interval between the first and second wave is always 4 to 7 hours depending on fleet speed. The second wave always hits the target the first wave weakened most. The third wave moves in only when they believe resistance is finished. The room was very quiet. They have never fought anyone who knew this in advance, Raoul said. No surviving world has ever been in a position to use it, Lane said. Raoul stared at the data sheet. His hands were doing the quiet 4-beat rhythm against the table edge. Ren had learned what that rhythm meant. If we survive the first wave, he said slowly, we could be ready for the second instead of reacting to it. Yes, Lane said. And if we made the second wave worse for them, then the first was for us. The third wave might not come, Ren finished. Raoul stood up. I need Doru and a structural map of every orbital platform, tonight. What followed were 8 weeks nobody would fully remember because no one slept enough. The humans worked in long, overlapping shifts. The Ithari were organized by nature, comfortable with schedules and clear roles. The humans operated on something else, a collective urgency that needed no assignment, running on the shared understanding that the work was real, the deadline was fixed, and there was no version of this where anyone stopped early. Priest arrived in week 6. He was a quiet man, formerly a soldier, now harder to categorize. He did not discuss his past unless asked and gave short answers when he did. What he did instead was show up every morning at the volunteer training field where Baal's 400 Ithari defenders practiced, and begin working beside them without introduction. He did not shout or lecture. He ran drills, and when something went wrong he stopped, said calmly what had gone wrong, and said what to do differently. The Ithari learned fast. Within 3 weeks, Baal's volunteers could hold a defensive perimeter without being told, rotate positions without a signal, and the hardest thing Priest said to teach, stay in place when instinct said run. He told Baal once that tactics were the easy part. You can learn tactics from a book. What I'm teaching is how to be scared and stay useful at the same time. That takes longer. Baal asked how long it had taken Priest. I'm still learning, Priest said. Baal wrote that down. The planetary shield generator came online at partial capacity on the 43rd day. Raoul and an Ithori engineer named Torvin had spent 11 consecutive days on it, sleeping in shifts on a cot beside the main coupling. The council sent formal thanks. Raoul sent back a parts list for the secondary array. Then a Drun scout drone appeared at the system's outer edge. Sarev ran the trajectory and came to Raoul quietly. They are not surveying. They are confirming approach vectors. Raoul looked at the map for a long time. Good, he said. Sarev blinked all 4 eyes at once. Good. We needed to know which direction they were committing to. Raoul circled a point on the map. Now we know exactly where to be waiting. He turned to find the others. There was no fear in his face. There was only the expression of a man who has been solving a problem for weeks and has just seen the last piece fall into place. The Drun fleet did not announce itself. No transmission, no demand, no signal. One moment the outer sensors showed empty space. 4 minutes later they showed 47 ships. In the council chamber, someone made a sound that was not quite a word. Tesov looked at the display and said nothing. He had been told this was coming. Knowing it was coming and watching it appear on a screen 2 astronomical units from your home were different kinds of knowing. Raoul was already on the second orbital platform when the Drun entered the system. He had been there since the previous morning, making final adjustments to the mass driver emplacements that Doru had installed across the platform's outer hull. The emplacements were not built from weapons. They were built from mining equipment, heavy-mass launchers designed to hurl rock through asteroid fields, now pointed at the space the Drun had just filled. The platform commander, an Ithori officer named Sel, looked at Raoul when the alert came through. Her smaller pair of hands were pressed flat against her sides, which meant tension. First wave inbound, she said. Wait for them to commit to a target, Ral said. 14 seconds later, the drone formation split. Half the ships angled toward Platform 1. The other half came toward Platform 2. Now, Ral said. The mass drivers fired. Not explosions, a series of deep rhythmic impacts, each sending a dense projectile at a speed conventional shielding had not been designed to handle. Mining equipment was never supposed to be a weapon. The drone had not updated their shield parameters for the possibility. 3 drone ships came apart in the first volley. 6 more broke formation. Platform 1 was hit hard. The blast took out its lower section and killed 4 Ithori crew members, but the upper section held and its guns kept firing. The first wave took 6 hours to push through. When it was over, Platform 1 was destroyed, Platform 2 was damaged, and 18 drone ships had been reduced to debris. Debris floating in the specific region Ral and Doru had spent 3 days seeding with proximity charges disguised as discarded cooling vents. The drone's second wave arrived 4 hours and 51 minutes after the first. It moved exactly as Lane had predicted, targeting where Platform 1 had been, expecting the weakest resistance. The charges detonated across a 2-kilometer spread. 2 drone ships got through the debris field. One hit the planetary shield at full power, and for 11 seconds, Torvin, running the shield controls from a bunker outside Selvarath, watched the power readout climb past every safe threshold he had ever seen. He held the output open manually, both hands on the controls. It did not tear apart. It held by a margin he would later calculate as roughly equivalent to coincidence. On the ground, Priest stood in the northern district with Bale's volunteers, and did not move when a drone boarding pod punched through a gap in the atmospheric coverage and dropped a ground unit 6 blocks away. Bale looked at Priest. "Rotate left, hold the line at the canal. Don't let them pass the bridge," Priest said. They held the bridge for 2 hours and 19 minutes. 3 volunteers were injured. None of them retreated. Ral was not watching any of this. He was inside a section of Platform 2 that had just depressurized, with 2 Ithori crew members caught in the same section when a drone strike cracked the hull. They had 40 seconds of breathable air. The emergency seal was on the other side of a collapsed panel. Ral moved the panel with his hands and tore a gash across his palm doing it. He did not stop. He got the seal in place with 12 seconds left. When the section repressurized, 1 Ithori crew member was shaking badly. The other was staring at Ral with an expression he could not read. He tied his hand with a strip from his sleeve and went back to the weapons console. Ren, running communications from the capital, had spent the last 3 hours broadcasting false fleet signatures on every drone frequency, invented positioning data, for a human reinforcement armada that did not exist. A hive mind could absorb losses. What it could not easily process was unknown variables. The false signals gave it too many unknowns to resolve quickly. The drone third wave stopped at the system's edge. It held position for 40 minutes. Then it began slowly to pull back. Nobody cheered. There was no noise at all for a long moment. People who had been running on fear and adrenaline for 9 hours went very quiet when the threat receded, because the body does not know what to do when the thing it was braced for stops coming. Sarev calmed Ral from the pale reach which had taken a hit to its navigation array. His voice was careful. "Ral, the third wave has withdrawn." Ral leaned against the console. He looked at his bandaged hand. "How's the ship?" he asked. A pause. "Navigating is currently theoretical. I'll walk you through an emergency manual approach. Can you receive input on the secondary controls?" "Yes." "Okay, let's bring you home." He talked Sarev down for the next 90 minutes, step by step, from memory. Sarev landed the Pale Reach in a field 3 kilometers south of the capital with a hard bounce that cracked 2 landing struts and injured no one. When Sarev confirmed they were down safe, he said, "I believe I owe you one." Ral was already looking at the damage reports coming in from across the platform network. "We'll call it even," he said. "The drone sent a signal on the third day after the battle. Not a weapon signature, a contact signal, a request for communication. In 31 years of expansion across 19 worlds, they had never sent one. They had never needed to. Every species they had faced had either surrendered or been too broken after the first wave to respond to anything." Tesov read the signal report twice. Then he stood at his office window looking at Sel Varath, still pale with dust the orbital impacts had shaken from the upper atmosphere. The city looked tired. It was still standing. He asked for Ren. She took the negotiation because she was the right person and because Ral told her plainly that he was not. "I know how to hold things together," he said. "I don't know how to talk to something that has never lost before. You do." Ren looked at him. "I have never negotiated with a hive mind." "No," Ral said, "but you have negotiated with things that think they are inevitable. Same principle." She left for the neutral station the drone had specified. She took 2 Ithori council members and a communications specialist named Ode who had spent a decade building translation frameworks for non-individual intelligences. What happened at that station took weeks and months to fully resolve. The drone had encountered something with no category in their experience, a species defending a world it did not own, a coalition that should not have worked, a resistance that knew their pattern. The hive mind, facing a truly new variable, did not escalate. It stopped and processed. Ren's false fleet signals had added enough uncertainty to extend that processing past the point of no return. The hardest part of the negotiation was not the drone. It was explaining humans, what they were, why they had come, what they wanted in return. The drone kept searching for a territorial claim, a resource interest, a political motive. They had no framework for a species that defended a world it had no stake in. Ren told them, "We have lost people to the dark before. We learned not to let it happen to anyone else if we could help it." The drone processed that for 11 hours. Then they asked what humans wanted in exchange. "Nothing," Ren said. "But we are going to be in this part of space for a while, and we would prefer things stayed stable." They processed that for another 4 hours, then agreed to a cessation of expansion pending formal talks. It was not peace, but pauses were what Ren built her work on. Back on Ether Prime, the repairs had started before the signal was even sent. Ral spent most of the week after the battle on Platform 2, working alongside Ithari and human crews in teams that had, somewhere over the previous months, stopped feeling like mixed teams and started feeling like crews. Doru and Torvin had developed a working shorthand that needed almost no translation. Priest's volunteers trained every morning, because Priest had told them a threat going quiet was not the same as a threat being gone, and Baal had agreed with enough certainty that no one argued. The council held a ceremony to commend the humans who had helped defend the planet. Ral arrived late because he had forgotten about it, and showed up in his work clothes with a grease mark on his left arm he had missed while cleaning up. He stood in front of the full council, and Tesov read a formal acknowledgement that was long, graceful, and written by someone with far more patience for ceremony than Ral had. Neera watched from the back. He stood still through the whole reading, looking like someone sitting through a thunderstorm, aware it would pass, not bothered by it, waiting. Afterward, Tesov addressed the people of Sel Varath publicly. He said, "We were rescued from the dark. We did not ask for it. A species that had nothing to gain came because one of their people asked them to. Let us learn what that means. Not only to need rescue, but to become the kind of world that shows up when someone else asks." Nobody cheered. They were Ithori. The silence after had a quality that was not emptiness. Ral left the ceremony as soon as it was polite to do so. He climbed to the roof of his building and sat on the edge, looking at the forest that bioluminesced in slow, cold waves below the city's southern edge. His hand was healing. The scar from the torn panel would probably stay. He had others and did not mind them. Saurav found him there. He had a way of finding people in places they had gone to be alone, which was either command or friendship, and Ral had stopped being sure of the difference. They sat without speaking for a while. "You could have gone home," Saurav said. "After we pulled you from the pod, you could have taken passage at the first relay station." "I know," Ral said. "Why didn't you?" Ral looked at the forest. The light moved through it in long, slow pulses, one wave following the next with no gap between them. "You stopped," he said. "You didn't have to. Goss had the numbers. It wasn't efficient. But you pulled me out and gave me 11 weeks and a chair and someone to talk to." He paused. "You can't do something like that for a person and not change what they are responsible for." "One life," Saurav said. "One is enough," Ral said. "That is always how it starts." 6 months later, the galactic records noted the drone cessation as caused by an unexpected defense coalition. Accurate, entirely missing the point. The point was one pod, one crew that stopped, one man who could not let a debt go unpaid. The rest was just what happened when you gave a human a reason.